Welcome to the Resiliency of the Human Spirit podcast, where we share all about human triumphs for the collective's healing and empowerment. I am your host, Priscilla Hanley. My guest today is Barb McIntosh. Barb is a sound healer, Reiki Master, and an end-of-life doula. She is an empath, a mystic, and a meditation guide. Barb has many parallel lives in other dimensions as a healer, and she loves to astral travel. She works with her clients through intuition and spirit guides. Without further ado, I'm going to bring Barb on right now. Hi, Barb.
Hi, Priscilla.
How's it going?
Good, good. Thank you for having me on this podcast.
Thank you for being here and taking time out of your schedule to join our audience today. So, Barb, I am very intrigued with your journey because we have similar interests. I'm very interested in parallel lives in other dimensions and astral traveling. So I just want to dive right in and have you start sharing your story on how everything started for you.
Okay. Well, I was in this particular lifetime, I was born into a family that was like purely scientific. So that was both my parents and my siblings. And that meant actually that there was a huge focus on mind, right? Because neither of my parents actually believed in feelings, emotions. They didn't believe in any kind of spirituality, and they really didn't pay much attention to their bodies either. So we were living in our mind, and that's very Western as well, right? I mean, they weren't the only parents, but I would, even from when I was born, I was super sensitive, and I was an empath, even though I didn't know until I was in probably my late 40s, early 50s, that I was an empath and what an empath was. And I had a lot of challenges in my childhood because of that, and in my family, because nobody wanted to deal with feelings. And I had a lot of them, and I absorbed everybody else's feelings. And I had no idea as a child that's what I was doing, and nobody to tell me, what that meant. I got sick a lot. When I went to kindergarten, I was now not only absorbing all of the emotions and energy of my parents and my siblings, I was absorbing 32 other little children emoting all over the place, right? And I wound up in the hospital when I was in kindergarten with severe pains in my abdomen, second chakra, right? Where we hold all emotions. And I was holding my own emotions, and I was holding everybody else's, and I had no idea that was happening. I thought they were all mine, but my emotions would go up and down and all over the place, all the time, because it was, it wasn't just mine. Anyway, they put me in the hospital for a day or two and did all these tests, and they couldn't find anything physical, of course, because it was emotional and spiritual. I think I found out probably in my early to mid 50s what an empath was. And, even at that time, I remember Googling on the internet, probably 15, 20 years ago, empath, and there was nothing. There was like one Facebook group of people who were trying to get off their medications. And then I was like, that doesn't help me, right? Although speaking of medications, when I was younger, and I cried a lot because for those of us who are empaths, and especially when we're small children, we're absorbing energy all the time. And the only way to get rid of that when you're a child is to cry or yell and scream and, all that kind of thing. And there was one particular year when I was sort of like pre-pubescent where I cried for like about, I don't know, a month. And I wouldn't go to school. And my parents were completely freaked out because they had no idea how to deal with their own feelings or anybody else's. And they took me to the family doctor, and I took these little green pills. It made me, that's what he gave me, little green pills. And it made me feel numb. Like it made me feel like a zombie. All of a sudden I had no feelings. And when I was in university and I was studying psychology, and I was somebody was giving a presentation, and all of a sudden they popped up this picture of my little green pills, and they were talking about phenobarbital, which, in the 60s, 70s, when I was growing up, was the kid, they called it the kiddie drink, right? So it's a pretty heavy duty tranquilizer, which made me stop crying. And then that made everybody in my family happy. And it was horrendously traumatic, for me. And I always thought that there was, something wrong with me, instead of it being a gift. But even later, in my life, when I was kind of discovering that, the first books that people were writing about an empath were coming out, and I realized that's what I was, I really couldn't get a handle for years and years and years on how to block anything. Now, that sounds a bit silly since I have a gazillion spirit guides and I've had them, since I was small. And, I had memories of past lives when I was little. Although when I was little, when I was growing up, I was in like lower middle class, Canada/America, whatever, right? And in the suburbs. And like, I just felt in my bones that if I told anybody that I had past lives, like, I would be just locked up somewhere for good, right? Which probably at the time that might have happened, right? So I kept all of that inside. And the older I got, especially in my late teens and early 20s, but all through my life, I remember more and more of different past lives. And so, and for instance, one of them was that I was a very young boy and I was on a sailing ship from Europe to the Americas. And my task was to go up the big pole. I think they call it the crow's nest, and sit there and yell out if anything was coming, right? And so at some point there was like a big, huge storm. And I remember being up in the nest, and the ship just went like that, and I fell into the water, right? And I drowned. So when I was a small child, I was sent to take swimming lessons. I failed beginners swimming 3 times because I would not put my head in the water. Like, I wouldn't put my face in the water. I couldn't, right? And I couldn't go underwater and open my eyes. And those were 2 things you had to do to get your beginners. And my mother was like, went nuts about it. Like, because, my sister, my brother, they were all like, they were passing, right? And she was like, why, it's not hard to do. And she would like yell at me. And I was just like, how could I say, like, and I didn't even very much at that point in time, because I was still very young. I didn't understand the connection, but I just knew in my bones that I died. Like, if my head goes under the water, game over. So, there was a lot of that growing up too. But I think being an empath was like pretty much the worst. Especially in those days, there was nothing written about it. Nobody talked about it. I mean, for people my generation, like, I'm 65, and for our generation, especially those of us who have incarnated on the planet now, at this point in time, many of us have, what's often called for women the witch wound, but it just means that we have not necessarily past lives, but we have alternate lives in other dimensions where we had healing abilities, and it was all linked to healing too, right? So where we had healing abilities, and we were basically persecuted and most of the time killed. Right. So I know that in I have past lives where, I was drowned, I was burnt, I was hung, like all that kind of stuff for being a healer. So,
and yet you're a healer today.
And yet I'm a healer today, but it took me most of my life to get here. I mean, I was a healer anyway, and just in the way that I interacted with people. I spent 25 years working with teenagers, and in particular, high risk teenagers. And I was really good at it, because I was a healer, and I was very, sometimes they would I remember one time a young man ran up to me in a conference we were doing, and he said, Barb. And I'm like, oh, hey, what's going on? And then he stopped and he just looked at me and he said, I don't know. And I was like, okay. And he said, I just feel better when I'm standing near to you. Is that okay? Can I just hang out with you? And I'm like, sure. Right. And I had no idea at that point in time that was because of my energy and my healing abilities. So I came very sort of late in life to the energy healing.
Okay, so you say you're an empath and that started at a very young age for you. So I'm just wondering, I am sure a lot of parents possibly have children who are empath and they have no clue how to deal with, the outbursts or the crying or maybe depression of the children. So what advice would you give to these parents who are having a tough time trying to understand their children because of their empath abilities?
Yeah. I think empaths, being an empath and being highly sensitive, like Elaine Aron's highly sensitive person, they're not exactly the same, but they're very similar. If you're an empath, you're a highly sensitive person. You just are, right? Maybe not necessarily the other way around. You can be highly environmentally, sensitive without being emotionally sensitive. So it's a little bit different. But I think for children, it's good. I think it would help if as a parent, you kind of look at what is triggering your child, right? And are they sensitive in certain sort of physical ways? For instance, people who are empaths and highly sensitive don't like tags in their clothing. This is a big one with children, right?
Tags, really?
Yeah, or they're very sensitive to materials, right? So you'll put some clothes on them when they're little, and they'll be like, this is just too scratchy, or it smells funny, or that kind of thing. And pretty much most of the time, if a parent has a child who wants the tags, where the parent is figured out to cut all the tags off the clothing, then you've got a child who's highly sensitive and an empath. But the other thing to notice is what happens to your child in different environments, right? So lots of time children have more meltdowns when they're out with a whole bunch of people, right? So if you're in a room, or if you're with people who are loud, or if you're with people who are angry, or, so it takes, for the parents, it takes you, you have to have enough sort of emotional awareness to know, right? So as an adult, if I go on the subway and I'm not shielding myself, and I sit down beside somebody who's really depressed, by the time I get off that subway train, I feel depressed. And I wasn't when I got on. And nothing happened to me on the subway that would make me depressed. I would feel really heavy, and I just feel like crying, right? So I think, to try to watch and talk with your children and kind of say, well, now you're upset and you're crying, or you feel sad, how do you feel? If your kid says, well, I feel sad, and they're like, well, were you feeling sad before we came over to, Granny's house, or before we went shopping in the mall?
Oh, yeah.
Or were you feeling anxious before we went shopping in the mall? And not usually, But so just try to see if the triggers are outside of, are coming from outside of the child, right? And it's hard for children to, to communicate that. And the other thing you can do with children is just some really simple, crying and having a temper tantrum is a physical relief of the energy that is pent up. And when I'm absorbing everybody's feelings, then I have way too much energy in my body, right? And it doesn't feel good. It's not good energy. And so there's sometimes physical ways that you can have your kids like to sort of run around. Sometimes that makes it worse because then they just get more upset. I find that like breathing really helps. So taking the old 3 breaths, take a deep breath in, through your nose, out through your mouth, and make a noise when you do it, right? And then as you do that, right? And when you're breathing in, you can tell them to imagine something nice, like the sun is shining down, or they're inhaling love, they're inhaling warmth, or whatever. And then when they breathe out, they're letting go of all the stuff that's giving them the wigglies, or
Right.
that's making them upset. And sometimes that's all it takes.
So you mentioned like if you're on a subway and you're absorbing somebody's energy, somebody seated next to you, and you talked about shielding yourself. So how do you shield yourself in that situation?
That's a really good question. I tried everything. Like there was all kinds of things of like imagine yourself in a golden bubble and imagine this, that, and the other thing, and none of those worked for me. I think the only thing that I do really is I don't try to stop that person's energy from coming in, because then I'm not connected to anybody,
Yeah.
when I'm in that state. And this is just my personal way of doing it. Doesn't
Okay.
mean that everybody else has to, but I just find that I need to be aware of, which I am anyway now. And because of all the energy healing and all the spiritual work that I've done, and also all of my sort of life journeys where I had to save myself kind of thing, right? I'm quite aware of what I'm feeling. And so if I notice that I'm feeling something, I'm feeling sad when I didn't start the day that way and I have absolutely no reason to feel sad. I know that. And so then I just kind of feel around, because I know it's more conscious with me feeling people's energies. Right. So when I'm with somebody, I don't have to know. I don't even actually have to stop and consciously figure out what their energy is or what their feelings are. I just understand it. So I don't know that it's as easy as making shields and barriers. It's more learning how to know yourself and how your own energy works and what happens, how it feels in your body, how it feels in your thoughts and your feelings when when does it change?
So it's kind of like discerning your emotions. Like, for example, before I got on the train, I was feeling okay. And then when I got off the train, I'm feeling heavy and kind of sad and depressed. So there's like there was a shift there, right? And like what you say, I agree to be conscious of your emotional state. And
Yeah.
I think that's how you're whether you're picking up other people's energy and emotions.
Yeah. And for me as an empath, it's super hard to, and maybe other people are different, but it's super hard to prevent that energy from coming into my body, but I can release it again. So, if you're starting to get really angry and I'm having a conversation with you, I can feel that anger is coming into my body, but then I can go, that's not my anger. So
Right.
it just goes out the back, in the front, out the back, or in the side, out the other side, like just so you can envision just letting that energy go right out the door. There was, I don't know if it was Thich Nhat Hanh or another Buddhist teacher, when they were talking about meditating, the teachers, they try to make little analogies for people. And one I really liked when I was learning to meditate was like you're sitting in like a little cabin and you have the front door open and you have the back door open. And a little bird flies in the front door. You don't do anything. You just wait and the little bird flies out the back. And so that's what you do with your thoughts and your feelings and your energy. So if you're continually being able to make yourself, that cabin or that person in that cabin, It's just kind of like, okay, you're really angry. That's not mine. Out it goes. And
That's
that, I
great
mean, that
advice.
works for me. That works for me.
That's
But
great
I figured
advice.
all that out myself, right? I read books. When I finally figured out I was an empath, I read books and I was like, how do you shield? Because that's what everybody wants to know, right? As soon as you realize that all this stuff coming in is not yours, but then how to tell the difference. I had to go to a therapist. Oh gosh, I forget when, probably 20, 25 years ago, around the time that I was figuring out that I was an empath. And I realized that, like, in order to discern between what are my feelings and what are the feelings of other people coming in, I had to know what my feelings were. Now, I grew up in a family where there was no feelings. And if you actually had, especially me, because I didn't, wasn't able to regulate myself the same way my parents wanted to. And I got sent to my room all the time for not just for crying, but for even like being happy and like running around. So expressing any feelings was then, punished when I was growing up. So I went to this therapist and I was like, and unfortunately she was able to do it, although it was a kind of horrific therapy. But I said, like, I don't know. I know how everybody else is feeling all the time. I can know if you're angry or sad or, excited or calm or whatever, but I don't understand and I don't know, because I didn't grow up like that, how to know how I feel. And so she would say these things to me to try to make me feel a certain feeling. And then she would say, where does it feel in your body? Like, that was a totally, bizarre concept to me. Well, I'm feeling, because she was pissing me off one day and I'm like, I'm feeling angry. And she's like, where does it in your body? I'm like, okay, well, I don't know. It's like this, like, wiggly energy, like in my solar plexus. Right. And then, but then I would say that in like that, what was in my body. And then she'd say, oh no, that's, that's some panic or that's fear or something like that. Right. And I remember screaming at her one day, like, because she kept, like, she was badgering me. How do you feel? How do you feel? Right. And I'd say how I felt. And then she'd say, no. She'd say, no, that's anxiety. And I had a lot of anxiety when I was a kid, and actually for most of my life, anxiety and depression. And those are two of the big feelings that everybody has. So it's not surprising those were my two biggies. Anyway, so I would say what I was feeling, and then she'd say, oh no, that's anxiety. And she did that for like about 6 or 7 feelings. And I'd been working with her for, I don't know, 3, 4 months by then. And I was so furious, like, and I was so panicked because I was like, so finally I yelled at her and I said, well, then, like, if you're telling me that everything, all the feelings that I'm having is anxiety, then I don't have any other feelings. Right.
Right.
And I used to cry like all the way through the therapy because it was so hard. But actually being, and this is actually something that parents can do for their kids too, right, when they're little, is really help them learn how to know what it is that they are feeling. Because if you don't know how you're feeling, then you can't discern,
Right.
what is
Right.
this energy? Because energy we can't see physically, so it's it's hard to look at that.
Yeah. So I want to shift now to how you started your sound healing journey. How did that occur for you? Did your spirit guides send you a message to say it's time for you to be a sound healer? Get going.
Pretty much.
Oh, wow.
I knew for most of my life. I knew, and especially in, I guess, my 50s, my late 40s, early 50s, when I started on a spiritual journey for myself. Things were not happening well in my personal life, and so I started doing yoga and meditation again. And anyway, and then I studied all kinds of different things, mysticism and Buddhism and Hinduism, and like all kinds of different spiritual ways of being. I knew actually for a long time that I had alternate lives in Tibet as a Buddhist monk was one. And I know that I used Tibetan singing bowls for healing. I didn't get that good at it in that lifetime because I died quite young, like not as a child, but not very old. It wasn't when I died. And in that particular lifetime too, I didn't really very often do what I was told in the monastery. So I got in trouble a lot. So that kind of, made things not great. But I did know that I used it. So, at various points in time in my life, I would have a singing bowl. And I basically just knew how to play them, right? And so after I had been working with young people and stuff in that job, it was a very hard job to do. And I was kind of in a good place to, to figure out what do I do next, kind of, right? Like I don't have to do this for the whole rest of my life. And so I basically just walking around downtown, I basically happened on like 2 or 3 different Tibetan stores where there was bowls. So I had maybe 2 or 3 little bowls that I bought. And, but then like one day I was walking my dog, and I don't like hear voices, but I get messages in my head.
Like downloads?
From spirit. Yeah, sometimes downloads, often more just sort of like talking, like, giving me messages, right? And so I had this message of like, you need to learn how to heal with these bowls. I was like, oh, that would be fun. That would be cool because I love the bowls. It was really nice. Now, sound healing then, and this was probably 15 years ago, I Googled sound healing on the internet. And there were a few places in California where they were doing sound baths, and that was pretty much it. I found one link to where someone in Toronto had played some crystal bowls like 5 years prior, and then nothing else. So I sent an intention out for healing, like for a teacher, right? Mm-hmm. I sent an intention out for a teacher, and nobody showed up. I asked people, and they all just kind of looked at me and like, they'd say, no, I don't know anything about that. And then I was on, and then this always makes me giggle. It amuses me. So one of the major ways, if my spirit guides are sending me messages and I'm either ignoring them or I'm just, I'm too focused on whatever, I'm not hearing them, then they use the internet. So I was on the internet one day, and I was on some site for work, for my other work. And all of a sudden my screen refreshed, in the browser, it refreshed, and there was a book, which was being sold. I mean, this was before Amazon and stuff. It was a book that was being sold by some strange place in Europe or something that I never heard of. But it was a book written by a fellow in India about how to use the singing bowls to heal. And he was teaching in the book both the Tibetan way and the Vedic way, because the singing bowls originated in India as temple bells, right? And then when they were brought to Tibet at the time when Buddhism came to Tibet, thousands of years ago, the Tibetans had a culture that was very shamanic, right? And they used sound to do all kinds of things, like to move stones up the mountains.
Wow.
To build their monasteries. And so that book I ordered because I was like, now why I couldn't have, like, I'd searched everywhere online too, and I was finding. So anyway, I bought the book. It came like about 3 weeks later, and I read it, and then I was practicing with my bowls. And then I discovered a place in Toronto here. A fellow had a meditation shop, but he also had singing bowls. And I spent 3 years going every Saturday afternoon. I went and hung out with him in his shop and played all of his bowls. And then, of course, I would buy some. So, and it took me 3 years to actually get a set of bowls that were were good for healing like specific chakras, right? And one day when I was actually, I had clients, doing sound healing with them. And I had done some Reiki for people before because I'd already at that point in time become a Reiki master. And so one time when I had finished with a client and they left and I had done, healing with the bowls, and I was walking past the bookshelf and the book written by this guy fell out on the floor, like right in front of me. And books don't fall out of shelves, right?
Right.
Like anyway, unless you're moving the shelves. So it fell out onto the floor and it opened up to the very back of the book, the back cover, in which there was a CD. And I was like, oh yeah, there's a CD in this book. I never actually really listened to it. Like I just read the book and then played. And as I was actually reading the book and playing, I felt very strongly that I already knew how to do this. And so I was remembering. I wasn't learning it. I was just remembering what I did in another timeline and dimension, right? And so I thought, oh, well, this would be fun because I had clients and I was doing sound healing. So I popped the CD in and I listened to it and I was playing and I was playing my bowls along to music and I was playing exactly the same as in his CD. Right?
Nice.
So strangely enough, that's a lot of times that's how my spirit guides will connect with me. Now, and that was more actually in the earlier days. And I think most of my spiritual journey and a lot of my spiritual trainings now allows me to communicate with them directly. Right? So I can basically just talk to them.
So for those in our audience that don't know, what is the science behind sound healing? How can sound help to heal our bodies or our cells or release us from our illnesses? How does that work?
Yeah. It's, interestingly enough, my dad was a physicist. And so my mother actually studied physics. And when I was younger, I hated him for that. Like I thought he was just so stupid that all he ever believed in was like this stuff you could prove, right? He didn't know anything about anything else. And when I started learning about sound healing, it's based on quantum physics. So every time I explain how sound healing works now to people, I just have, my dad's passed away quite a while ago, but I just have this little chuckle in my head, right? Because I know like his spirit is somewhere looking down at me going, huh?
Yeah.
Because he always thought I did woo-woo things, and he'd say, when are you gonna get a real job? And all that kind of thing. But so basically one of the biggest laws of quantum physics, or most of the laws in quantum physics, are based on the fact that everything is energy, everything is vibration. Right? And vibrations are also called frequencies. So there can be frequencies of sound, there can be frequencies of light. And that's how energy moves. Spiritually, we are all part of one big energy body. Some people call that God, some people call it the cosmos, there's lots of names for it. But basically everything, and everything has a frequency, right? Even rocks and mountains. And now it's a very low frequency, right? For objects that are really solid. So we actually don't have a physical body in the sense that we think we do, because our body is made up of frequencies, right? Everything in our body, our cells, everything inside our cells is vibrating all the time. And for human beings, there's a frequency range that's healthy, the range that our cells vibrate at, which is somewhere, people say different, sort of a little bit differently, but basically it's somewhere between 62 and 72 hertz. Different parts of our body, different organs have slightly different frequencies. And the second kind of thing about quantum physics that explains sound healing is called the law of entrainment. So that means if you have two things near each other, that are vibrating, the one with the most powerful vibration will pull the vibration of the other towards it. And that was discovered, I think, by some guy in France in the 1600s. And this is just such a good example to let people kind of understand how that works. He took all these pendulum clocks. A lot of people don't even know what that is anymore, but he took all these pendulum clocks. I don't know why he did it. Nobody really knows. He put them all in a room and he shut the door. And they're all different sizes and all different kinds. And they were all going tick-tock, tick-tock all over the place, like it was a big cacophony of sound, right? Because they all had different vibrations, different frequencies. And when he came back in the morning, all of the clocks were going tick-tock, tick-tock, which was the rhythm of the biggest, therefore most powerful clock. So what happens with disease is now, besides the fact that our body is vibrating ourselves, also our thoughts and our feelings have vibrations. Okay, now our thoughts and feelings are, scientifically, they're electromagnetic, frequencies that are produced by your body. And they have different frequencies, right? So for instance, the feeling love vibrates at about 500 hertz. Way higher than our bodies. Right. But when you're in love, especially when you're younger, and you don't know all the pitfalls, it's just such an awesome place to be in, right? Or any kind of love. So it's like 500. And hate and anger are down at about 25. Right. So when we're in toxic situations, if we have a toxic workplace where people are depressed and angry, and because all of those feelings and the thoughts that go with them are low vibration, certain cells in our body, and this is different for everybody, this is usually kind of your weakest cells, will fall, like their frequency will fall. And if you go down, if you start going down below 62, like maybe into the high 50s, people start getting more flus and more colds. Then you go down to the mid 50s or the lower 50s, people start getting the immune diseases more often, right? When you go down to 45, you have precancer cells in your body, and cancer cells are 25 hertz.
So that's the hate and anger.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be yours. Oftentimes it is, but I mean, stress is a big, huge one. Stress will take your whole body, down eventually over time. Yeah. And if you don't have then positive environments, and if you're not eating clean, like if you're eating low grade, like processed foods have like pretty much no frequency. Yeah. If you eat anything in a can or a bottle, it's really not vibrating at all. It's pretty dead. Yeah. Right? So if you're eating dead food, and if you're absorbing all of this environmental stuff, pollution, fires, construction, if you're living near construction, right? Those noises are very, they're dense, but they're more powerful. And powerful doesn't necessarily mean loud. It just means that the vibration is that. So that's how we get sick. Most Western medications just kind of, cover up the symptoms or try to deal with the symptoms. It doesn't ever get to the root cause. The shamans of old and in various different countries always healed, like energetically and frequency wise. So they would drum, they would rattle, they would chant. Those are all sounds and methods of sound healing, right? If we hum, if you hum, and this is one of my favorite ones, because you don't need all of my awesome instruments or even me. I mean, I can do more sound healing than most people can. But if you're kind of down in the dumps or you want to kind of up your energy if you hum with your lips closed, right? What that does is it creates a sound chamber in your nasal passages and in your mouth, inside your body. And that produces nitric oxide, which then does all kinds of things, right? It sends messages, to your vagus nerve and that to switch your body from sympathetic mode, which is the fear flight, over to parasympathetic. It reduces your blood pressure. It gets rid of pain. It ups your level of thoughts and feelings that you're having. So you can sound heal yourself basically from humming. Creates those biological things happening in your body, right? So sound healing isn't just quantum physics, it's also the biology of our bodies.
That's powerful. So you have a special gift for our audience today because you're a sound healer and that's your only business right now, Barb. Is that accurate? So, and you have like I said, a special gift for our audience. You want to elaborate more on that?
So a lot of people don't know that much about sound healing, and they don't, it's hard to understand how it works unless you can actually feel it. So my gift for everybody today is if you go to calendly.com/Barb Sounds, all one word, you can book with me a free 1 hour, discussion, exploration. And that will include that part of that we'll be talking and whatever, but part of it will be a sound bath, a little mini sound bath that you can have just to see how it feels. Because unless you really feel it, in your body, then it's hard to kind of understand.
And also talk about your YouTube channel.
Yes. If you want to know more about sound healing and you're intrigued, or if you want to just have a little and listen, I have my YouTube channel is just youtube.com/@barbsounds. And for most of 2023, I've been doing, they're pretty much done now, but there's about 30 podcasts on there, half-hour podcasts where I talk about sound healing, and then I do like a little 5-10 minute demonstration. And I've also done a playlist with just the playing, like the little 10-minute bits. And mostly what I was doing was, I play very intuitively, so I don't heal people. Nobody can heal you. We have to heal ourselves.
Right.
But what I do is create and hold sacred space with you in it, if you're my client, right? And then I create the frequencies with my instruments, my harmonic instruments. I create the frequencies that are going to allow your body and mind to heal whatever it has to heal. And primarily that happens by actually because the sounds from what I do, it puts your body into deep relaxation as if you were in deep sleep. It puts your mind into the alpha theta waves, like that people meditate for 25 years to get to. And in those states of calm and parasympathetic mode, your body can heal itself. And oftentimes I find even what people think they want to heal in a certain session doesn't always happen because they're thinking that with their mind. But what is ready to heal? So I often ask people, what are you ready to let go of? What do you think you're ready to let go of? And then, some people can come for one thing. I remember one time when I was doing a podcast and I was playing for something like some emotion or thought. And when I was done, my host said, "Oh, that was really great." And, I could feel that. And he says, "And my shoulder's kind of feeling better." Nice. And I was like, "Oh, well, you didn't think that was going to happen, did you?" And he's like, "No." And I'm like, "Well, that's how it works sometimes, right? You don't think that today is the day for getting rid of the pain in your shoulder. But our bodies are a lot wiser, than we are sometimes. So not just physical things, but feelings too, right? Basically, if you search for Barb Sounds, all one word, or @Barb Sounds, depending on which social media I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, although I don't use that much, and Facebook. I forget what else. Anyway, if you just search for Barb Sounds or at Barb Sounds, you'll find me.
Okay. I have a signature closing question here that I ask all my guests. So here is the question. What is your closing message for humanity to help in our collective healing and empowerment?
Aha, that's a good one. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to read a little quote from the Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama, or at least I'll paraphrase it. So there was a study in Germany done that showed that the average person emits only 20 photons of light per second. Okay, that's not a lot. Someone who meditates in their heart center and sends love and light to others emits an amazing 100,000 photons per second. That is 5,000 times more than the average human being, on a given day. And numerous studies have also shown that when these photons are infused with loving and healing intent, their frequency and vibration, so we've been talking about today, increases to the point where they can literally change matter, heal disease, and transform negative events. And if everyone in the world spent 10 minutes a day, because you only need to do it for 10 minutes, right? And if you do it once a day for 10 minutes, you will feel awesome for the whole rest of the day. But if all of us on the planet could beam out love and light, right, from their heart, and you don't have to know how to get into your heart center and all that stuff, just do it, from your heart. Our heart is a much bigger brain than this one up here.
Yeah.
Right? Our heart and our gut, those two are the things that we need to pay attention. So pay attention to your heart and your gut, what they tell you, because that's mostly true, not what your mind says. Our mind makes up stories all the time about everything, right? So it's not really the best place to kind of hang around. But if you beam out love and light from yourself, from your heart to the world, you don't need to beam it out to anybody specifically. You can if you want to. If somebody's having surgery or somebody's, going through a rough time, you can do that too. But if we imagine how the energy on this whole planet would change pretty quickly too, if we all could do that. So that's good for your health, and it's good for the health of the world. And if we want to get ourselves into the new earth, which is coming and is happening, and we're looking at the messy stuff right now, the chaos and everything, all the junky, bad stuff that's happening in the world is really, I think, just the old paradigms and the old ways of doing things just falling apart, the old power structures. And so, but we need to be thinking now, not kind of focusing on that, because if you focus on negative energy, you're going to have negative energy. Sure. But we need to be focusing, especially the younger people, on what kind of world do we want to live in? What kind of world do we want to live in? We have a chance now to change that. So yeah, beam love and light out. And I know that sounds all woo-woo and whatever, but it's the most powerful. Just remember 500 hertz. And joy is actually at the very top, which is 800 hertz. Right? So beam out love and light and joy and healing, and we can heal the planet and everybody on it.
Yeah.
And everybody can help. People say, oh, it's way too big and da-da-da, and everything's a big mess. I agree. There's a lot of stuff we can do in the old ways of doing it, but everybody can sit quietly for 10 minutes in the day. Even if you go in the bathroom and shut the door and lock it, if you have small children or whatever, people are going to bother you. Just do that, do it from sitting on the toilet in the bathroom.
Right.
Or the bathtub.
I think it's never meant to be difficult. It was always meant to be easy. It's just that we make it complicated. So I love this message, Barb. Thank you so much. It is much needed for us to hear this message. I mean, we can all spare 10 minutes, even 5 minutes. It's something, right? So Barb, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge about sound healing. And I am so grateful to have you here, and I would love to have you back on. And maybe next time we can talk about your astral travels.
Oh,
I would
yeah.
love that.
We could talk about my astral traveling and my cancer journey and all that stuff.
Yeah,
We
I'll
didn't
have
talk
you
about
back on
today.
next time.
Okay. That'd be
Cool.
awesome. I'd love to.
And for everybody who's watching and listening, thank you for your time. And until next time, bye for now.